Good afternoon, Fluent. How you guys doing? Quiet. I was hoping to get this up earlier. If you want to follow along, you can go to that short URL, x.co Fluent 2014. If you've got Node installed and you've got MongoDB installed on the default port and you pull the GitHub repo down, it'll be on that link. You'll be able to follow along and make code changes and see how everything works. We're talking about ExpressJS today. My name is Guy Ellis. I work at GoDaddy. I'm a director of engineering there. We're one of the gold sponsors at this event. We have a booth. Last time I checked, nobody was there. But if you are looking to work in Node, we're hiring at the moment. And I think we have about 160 teams at GoDaddy. And every month I see a new team starting off with a Node project. So a lot of Node and a lot of JavaScript work happening. Great place to work. Please come to the booth and talk to them about opportunities. I'm going to try and keep this short and practical. I want to leave you with something that you can use when you leave this presentation, something that you can actually reference to build an application that uses Express and writes and reads from a database. And if you get that out of this, then we've achieved our objective. And to do that, we're going to be looking at routes in ExpressJS. We're going to be looking at the view engine and a connection to the database. What is Node? What is Express? I'm going to try and keep this brief. I'm sure you all know what Node is, V8 engine, it's server-side JavaScript. Express is a framework, an MVC framework, that makes Node development much easier than using native Node. So to install Express, if you have Node installed, you'd install Express by going npm install Express. I'm not going to. Now this installs it locally. I'm not going to install it. I've already got it installed. My preference is to add -g on afterwards. This installs it globally. It means it'll be available anywhere. Now, once you have this installed, this will allow you to spin up, to bootstrap a shell application, which is what we're going to do next. Bootstrapping. What I'm going to do is just. I didn't mean to do that. We're going to bootstrap it, go through some view engines, routes, JViews, and then work on the database. So let's get away from the slides and go into the real stuff, the exciting stuff. So I'm going to do Express, and I'm going to type in demo. And what that's going to do is it's going to, yes. What it's going to do is it's going to bootstrap an application in Express for me in the demo folder. And what it's done is it's added the basic shell. Now, I'm going to go off and run this right away, and it won't work. And the reason it didn't work is because I haven't added the modules. So in order to add the modules, once you've bootstrapped an Express application, you'll need to run npm install. And that will look at the package JSON file and go off and pull down everything that's needed. So what I have here is I have WebStorm, an editor, and this is we have that particular folder open at the moment. If I open the package.json file, this is what when I ran npm install in that folder, it's opened the package.json file, which the bootstrap created. It looked into dependencies and said, hey, Express and Jade are both dependencies. Go and pull them down and install them. And then that added this nodes module, node_module, and added Express and Jade, and all their dependencies were pulled down into that. And that's how we kickstarted the application. Now, when I was planning this, I had a whole thing about showing a native, a regular Node application versus this one and building it up slowly. But at the end of the day, you just got a whole bunch of really basic information, and you didn't get anything really meaty. So I've skipped past a lot of the basic stuff, which is available to do, and I'm hoping to get to the meaty stuff, which will give you real power to use. Now that I've installed this, I should be able to run. If I come back here, the application started. It's running on port 3000. If I go to localhost 3000, it brings up my basic Express application. So we have a basic shell application up and running that we can now work off and build a real application. One of the disadvantages of running it like this is that each time I want to make a change, I have to come in here and restart Node in the application. There's an application called NodeMon, and what that will do is every time I make a change to any of the source files, it will restart the server, so I don't have to keep on popping back to the server and breaking out like I just did now and restarting it. It's a convenience, and it's a boon for development. So let's take a quick look at the shell. This is the app JS file that's generated for you. I'm going to go through some of these parts really quickly. We have Express, which is obviously what we're working on now, and a few other items that have been required and set up. We then initialize the Express application. Express gives us a dictionary, a key value pair, where we can set a whole bunch of things. Here, for example, we're setting the port. Later on, down here, we'll do a get. So we'll read from that dictionary the actual port number. If you're using Windows, you may have the environment variable port set to 80. That will clash with IAS, and it won't work. You can either delete this little bit of code and just set it to 3000, or you can change your port in your environment variable. It also sets up views. It sets up where the views are. Now this is Express is a model view router. The controller is called a router in Express, and it's pretty much the same thing. And so we don't have a model folder yet, or a model collection. We'll have that in the next part of the example. We do have views, and we do have routes, and routes are the controller in the MVC model. And this here is just telling us where the views are. They're in the views folder, and also tells us that the view engine we're using is Jade, which is the default view engine. And if I have time, I'll compare a few view engines at the end. We then set up a bunch of stuff, and we tell Express that we're going to use it. And of particular interest down here is the router. We've set up the router, and we've also set up a location, or the Bootstrap application is set up a location where static files are served up from. So anything in the public folder, which is this folder here, is deemed to be static. So anything it finds in there, it will just serve that up. It won't process it at all. It's just a static file. So what we're going to do is I'm going to add a static file here, a simple HTML file. Call it sample. And if I switch over to here, type in sample, it's given me it's returned the HTML, which is exactly what we would expect. Now, we're going to go off, and we're going to be slightly evil. And we're going to stick sample.html in a route. Refresh, and it gives us, because that particular route is linked to the home page that you saw earlier, it's going to take the sample HTML and reference one of the routes. So it's overridden it. So you've got a problem here if you have files which are named the same in public and in routes. But what's important is the order in which these guys are declared. So if I want to restore the way that it was, I can switch these two guys around. I should be able to come back in here, hit F5, and it goes back to the other one. So the order in which you declare items in here is important. And we can get rid of that evilness. Now, the way that routes work is that they have there's some intelligence built in. I'm going to create a route. Now, the routes.index is a file that's referenced in here. It's the index file, and that will. The way that we structure an Express app is to keep it tidy. We'll put all the routes into the routes folder. That way, it doesn't clutter up the base file here, the application. But for convenience, I'm going to put the function that this guy calls right in here. The first parameter is the request. This is when the browser makes a request, it sends an HTTP collection of key value pairs and sometimes a form post, etc. That will be passed in as the request parameter. And then the res parameter is the response. So this is how you manipulate the response that's going back. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in a customer URL. And I'm going to say res.send customer. And if I go over here and type in customer, it should show customer, which is what I typed in. And the other thing you can notice down here is that it's determined that by doing res.send, customer was text HTML. It determined that itself. Now, if I change this into a JavaScript object, and I do the same, it will return application JSON. And it did this automatically for us. And then if I do a render, so by saying send, I'm just sending whatever I have in parens back down to the server. Now, if I do render, it's going to go off and find a view, take the data I passed to it, combine the two, and send that back down. So what I'm going to do is use the same. I'm going to use one of the Jade views over here that I'm going to get to shortly. Where are the views? I haven't expanded them. I'm going to use the index view from the Jade views, and I know that it's expecting a title. And I'm going to put Fluent in there. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the view and an object, and render will combine them together and return this. So if this works, we'll get Fluent and welcome to Fluent. So this is the same page that we had previously, just different data passed to it. So if we dive into, and the other item that will be of note here is that we also had a file not found. Interesting. If we go look at the route, not the route, the view. If we go and look at the view, this is the Jade view that was rendered. And the JSON that we passed in, the title, that guy there, is matched up here. Now, if you haven't seen Jade before, I'm not a fan of Jade. I prefer working in what I see on the browser. So I prefer working in HTML. And I chose this because it's pushed me out of my comfort zone and it's made me try something different. If you like CoffeeScript, if you like Ruby, this will probably be more appealing to you. It's indent sensitive. It's fairly obvious what it is. The H1 tag is obviously an H1 tag in HTML. The P is a paragraph. You can assign a value directly to it if it's the first item on the line. If you've got text, then you need to put in a hash and a curly brace to get that information out. It's using a layout, and it's this guy here that's pulling in the style sheet that's giving us a 404. I'm not sure why it's doing that. I'm not going to debug it right now. I want to get on to more interesting stuff. Now, if I were to go to my customer, and I want to add customer 1 is myself, and I hit enter. It'll say cannot get customer 1 and gives us 404 because it doesn't know about this route. So what we can do is we can explore a little bit about what routes do. I can set up the routes to understand variable parameters. So I can put an ID, which is typically the identity in a database would be the ID, which is obvious from the example that I'm using. That would be identity number 1. And then I'm going to put in slug afterwards. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a send. And let's get customer plus. Now, when we made if we use the requests object, the request object will pull down all the information from the URL and break it apart for you. So we have a params collection, and in that params collection, I can directly reference the ID, which gets pulled off the URL. And I can say slug is, and I should be able to and this is just a JavaScript object. So I could also reference it. Let me do that right now. I should also be able to reference this using this notation. So let's mix this and see if that works. So there's customer 1 slug, and then it's, customer is the ID is 1, and then the slug is my name. So that shows some of the power of pulling parts of the URL off. We can also use query parameters. So if we remove this and we replace this with query, and then came over here. ID equals 1. It gives us the same information. Let's just make sure that it is working by changing that value to 2, and that's working. So we can pull parts of the query object. We can also put a regex expression in here as well to match a number of different types of patterns. And that's the reason why I showed you the difference between the order of public and the routes, is that if you have a regex expression and routes come ahead, regex is extremely powerful, can match a broad range of URLs. You may find that some of your static files are being ignored because the regex is picking up the pattern early on. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch across to an application that I prepared earlier, and this is the one that's on GitHub if you followed that link earlier, and you can follow along with this. So I'm going to open the app.js. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this application over. Before I do so, you can see that the server's been active, restarting. So each of these items where there's a date and time, the server restarted because it detected that I changed the code in the previous application that we were working on. So we have this server up and running, and here's an example of a regex. This maps /range/number ... It gives you an idea of a range. Pull this down, play with it if you need to use a regex in there. What I've done is I've added some new routes with a tree in it. Tree. I have an orchard at home, and I was thinking of creating an inventory system for the orchard. These two routes are identical, tree and tree. What's different is that it's using the HTTP get verb on one, and the other one it's using the post. And we'll see how those are used shortly. Now, one other thing that I wanted to mention was that I've also installed Mongoose. Mongoose is an objects document mapper, which takes the objects that you want to write to a database and writes them, well, to the Mongo database specifically, and prepares them and manages all the management of writing and reading from the database. And I've installed that. I went into the application folder and I typed in npm install Mongoose, and that would install that and it will add this module. So let's first of all take a look at the Jade view for creating an item in the database. And I'll quickly run through this. We have, it's fairly intuitive if you know HTML. That's the form element. The dot indicates that we've got a class. And so it's using the form-horizontal class. I'm using Twitter Bootstrap here. The action is going to do a post, HTTP post, and it's going to post back to the tree URL. We have a label, we have an input, which is what type of tree it is, and another label, the quantity of trees we have, and an input as well, and then we have a save button. In our routes over here, to keep it tidy, we've got a tree.create, and in our routes, we have this here. And in the tree.create, what it's doing is it's just rendering that particular view. So let's go in and take a look at that. And what I'm going to do is go straight into the creator view and show you it working. Then we're going to go back and watch how it actually did this. So I'm going to add a tree to the orchard. I'm going to say it's a Fluent, and I'm going to add that. It takes me back to another view, which we'll get to. I'm going to add another tree. These are our types of trees. This is an apium, and let's say we have 3 apiums in the orchard. Anybody know what a Fluent is? Or an apium? A Fluent is a cross between a plum and an apricot. An apium is a cross between a plum and an apricot. The difference is that a Fluent has more plum, and an apium has more apricot in it. What you'll find is when you think back on this presentation, the only thing you're going to actually remember is the difference between a Fluent and an apium. And the really sad thing is that's actually true. So what happened there was when I did the when I clicked send, it did the post that you saw earlier. So this post, this is the route that was hit. And what it did is it called the create tree function. So let's look at that create tree function. This guy here called the data method, the data object, and called the create method on that, and it passed in a request.body. So this is the post body, and rec.body has passed it and put it into an object for us. Data, the object is a model object, which I said we would see later on in the next example. And this is something that I created, and this is what this guy is the data management layer, and this uses Mongoose. So over here, I'm doing a require Mongoose, so I need Mongoose to use this. I'm declaring the URL, and this is where Mongoose is and what database I'm going to use. So I've said localhost defaults the default port, and I'm using the Orchard database. Now, what's interesting is that the Orchard database did not exist when I started this, and I will get to that in a short while. I'm going to delete the database, and I'm going to show you how to do that. We're connecting to the database. We're setting up a schema, and then in create, we're creating an object from the schema, and then over here we're taking the data that came in, and this is that tree is what was posted to the. That was what was posted in that form, and that's what we're going to write. We're going to create an Orchard object out of it, and we're going to write that straight to the database. So if I put tree here, we'll be able to see that in the server logs afterwards. We could also do console.log here as well. Console.dir does the whole object. Are you familiar with CLDD? You know, TDD and BDD, CLDD. So CLD is console.log-driven development. And please don't go back to work and tell them that you have to use console.log-driven development. But it's a very common way of getting debug information in Node. So I'm going to add another Fluent again. And hopefully you'll realize that we shouldn't be doing that. So over here, at the bottom, the penultimate line, it has the object that's being passed through. So you can see that the object has a tree, a quantity, and a save. And the save button has been posted as well as part of what you see there. However, what we've done is we've declared a schema here. Now, MongoDB is a NoSQL database. It's schemaless, it's structureless. Mongoose adds structure to it. And what it's done is it's stripped out, because we haven't declared the save button, it's stripped that out and hasn't saved that to the database. Now, if I say save should be in here, I mean, it's nonsensical. You wouldn't want to do that. And we did this again. What type of tree would you like to add this time? This is going to be the most profitable orchard in the world. So I've added another tree, and now let's go and look at, I'm going to bring up the database. So what I'm doing here is I'm bringing up the Mongo shell, and the Mongo shell I'll try and talk you through the commands if you're not familiar with it. This will just give us a view into the database. Show DBS shows the databases. We can see we have the orchard database, which you saw earlier was declared. I'm going to use orchard. Show collections will show me all the collections that are in the database. And we have one collection that's actually a collection, so I can go db.trees.find, and with no parameters, it will show me everything that's in the database. You can see that the last line, so very quickly, let's look at the very first line that it printed out. It's almost identical to what you saw come back from the browser. We have a tree, which is a Fluent, the quantity 2. Underscore ID is something that MongoDB provides for you. Every document is a record. Every document has to have a unique identifier. In this case, it generates what you can see is it obviously looks like a GUID, a UUID. Then the very last item, the _V, is a versioning system that Mongoose uses. So if you're using Mongoose, you'll see that at the end. MongoDB adds the penultimate item, the _ID, and then the other items are for us. If you look at the very last row, you can see that save has been added as well. And that was because we declared that in the schema, and because we passed it in as data, it picked it up and passed it through. Now, another thing that's interesting that we can do is I can add a tree. Let's add a Fluent with no quantity. Let's add an unknown tree. And then let's add some blank trees. There's nothing stopping us at this point. We can just add as much junk as we want. There's nothing preventing us adding junk, and Mongo is completely happy with that. So Mongoose will help prevent this from happening. So we can, instead of just saying that tree is a string, we can say that we can set that to an object. We can say the type is a string, and we can say required is true. Let's do that down here as well. And now let's add a tree. It takes me back here. Now, there's no on-screen error, but if we look over here, we have a validation error, and that's been done by Mongoose. It says quantity is required and tree is required. So Mongoose is preventing us from saving because we've done that little bit of validation. Now, you've probably spotted the other problem. The other problem is that we have trees repeated, which, if you're doing quantities, that's obviously a problem. So I would like to modify this to make the tree unique. And the way that I'm going to do that is by saying that the schema has an index, and on that index, tree, this is the index. And in this particular case, it's just saying that it's indexed in a descending order. I think it's descending. And I'm also going to say that it's unique. Now, what is cool about this is that we haven't done anything with the data. We haven't gone and set up a schema. We haven't done anything. And we can control this all from our source code, from the whole way that Express works with this. And we can get our data, everything set up, and the database is automatically spun up. Now, if I come along here and I try and insert another Fluent, and it wants a quantity now, it is still going to work, and it's going to insert another one. And the reason it does that is because when we spin up our application and Mongoose initializes, at that point it goes off and says, hey, does this table exist? No, it doesn't. I'm going to create it. Are there any indexes? I'll create those indexes, make them unique, etc. So it's too late for this to work. So what we need to do is have all that set up, and you would have had that set up earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this database. If you haven't tried this in production before, you should. DevOps will love you, the execs will love you, customers will love you. It's actually a real career-enhancing move. That's how I got to be director. I dropped a database, blamed it on somebody else, and then restored from a backup. Very, very evil. Right, so I've removed the database. And the other thing that I have to do is I have to make sure that I restart the server, because if I don't restart the server right away, okay, we're just about done. If I don't restart the server right away, it's not going to pick up that index. So if I very quickly add a tree, no, those other ones aren't there, so I'll add a Fluent number, save that, and I'm going to try add Fluent again, and you'll see that it fails down here. It says duplicate key error. And the other thing that's interesting is if we now look at the database, show collections, one of the things that I didn't do earlier was show the indexes collection. And previously, had I shown you that, you'd have only seen the first line, which was the fact that Mongo automatically creates that index, the underscore ID, which sets it to 1. It is unique, although it doesn't say that it's unique here. The second index is what was created. That's the tree. It's got the descending order, and then it's got unique equals true. And that it set it up from Mongoose set all that information up, or rather did that for you when it created the table, because it knew from this particular command here that it had to be unique. It had to set that up for you. And the thing I love about that is you've done all of this in code. You haven't touched the database. All you did was spin up a database, and you left it sitting there, and you've got a fully fledged database which you can read and write to. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to show you the reading part. That would be in this index view here. It reads. Jade will iterate through collections, set up tables, etc. Feel free to engage me on GitHub or Twitter, or email me, and I'll help you walk through any other examples that you want. Thank you very much.